I did want to pull the thread a little bit more on the executive order. We talked about the very unsexy aerostats and airships that we've seen of yore. But there is something that gets a lot of attention in the executive order, and that is space-based missile interceptors. So I'm wondering if you would talk a little bit about the feasibility of these things. I mean, this has been something that's been pushed for in past administrations for decades, but has never really gained traction. Trump tried this in his previous administration. It's back in the executive order as a pursuit. So talk about, is this something that is on the horizon for us? Is it actually a capability that would be useful in defeating some of these newer threats?
So I'm glad you brought up space. It is one of the most innovative parts of the executive order. And I'd break space up into two elements. One is the sensing tracking layer that's critical to hypersonics, critical to large ballistic missile strikes. That has made advances. Both Space Defense Agency and Missile Defense Agency are running systems. I would say it's one of the few times when they're close to delivering on time, in developmental work, and maybe it's because they're competing with each other. Something about that, and so that is fully advocated for in the executive order, and Senator Sullivan does as well. And I think that's being funded and doing well. Eventually, there'll be a little bit of down selecting between some of the systems, but right now redundancy is not an issue. The more innovative part, and something that's probably more about the third or fourth epoch, so to say 5 to 8 years from now, is the idea of using space-based intercept. And you're absolutely right that this has a checkered past. I would say, first of all, technology's really changed. I've been briefed on some systems, unclassified, that I think are very promising. And the beauty is you're relying on God's gift of gravity, vice three rocket motors strapped to the end of a missile to try to get it into above 100,000 feet and into space, and then do a high-speed intercept at Mach 15. So I really like the idea of a space-based intercept. And we're going to have to fight in and through space. There is no international legal prohibition on that. There's an international legal prohibition on nuclear weapons in space that we've signed, but not on fighting in space. And our two adversaries, China and Russia, are aggressively developing these types of weapon systems. So from my perspective, Epoch 1 is still probably about sensing. The next 2 years is about sensing and tracking, and then transitioning in years 4, 5, 6, 7 to the potentiality for engaging. That's the only way to drive down the cost per intercept. Ground-based interceptors are jaw-droppingly expensive, 80 million plus. SM-3s, 20 million. THAAD, 10 to 20 million. Arrow 3 from the Israeli side, expensive as well. If we don't have to have all those rocket motors attached, if we don't have to break the bonds of Earth to go do the intercept, we're going to be in a lot better position. So from my perspective, space-based intercept has got to be one of the most significant engineering aspects of the executive order that may not see itself as an acquisition aspect for 4, 5, 6, 7 years.
I agree with Mark, and I think it's really helpful just to think of it in those two compartments, sensing and striking. And I don't think we can undertake this effort successfully if we don't have a strong space component at the broadest level. And then for members and staff who have folks on the Senate Foreign Relations, House Foreign Affairs committees, let me just add this element, and going back to my idea of needed national champions, is that China and Russia, as we know, have been engaged in activities related to space for a long, long time. And so I think sometimes in the Beltway, there's a tendency, we should or shouldn't do this because our adversaries might respond in a way we don't like. Well, newsflash, they're already doing a lot of these things. And so I don't have a lot of, I try to always be patient, but I don't have a ton of patience for don't do something to defend ourselves, our country, and our citizens because our adversaries might be doing something bad. In many cases, they're already doing it. Hello. And by the way, a lot of what they're doing is really cynical. One of the most protected cities on Earth in terms of air and missile defense is called Moscow. it's called Moscow, and it's been that way for a long time. And so they have no problem with hypocrisy and cynicism and trying to say that our missile defense is provocative as they build their own. And they've brought the same cynicism into this space discussion. China and Russia have collaborated at the United Nations to try to bind our hands with international law about what we can do in space as they're doing the very thing they're trying to bind our hands on. So let's call out the cynicism and hypocrisy, and let's see it for what it is, and let's defend ourselves, and that's going to require actions in space.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a very insightful conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.